Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Dogco Secrets podcast. My name is Michelle Kline. I am your host, and I am also the founder of Dogco Launch, where pet care companies come to grow and scale. In today's episode, I want to talk a little bit about a trip I just took. I just took 2 weeks off the grid, 2 weeks away from my business, and I want to share a little bit about why I'm so committed to this practice, why it's something that I really recommend other company owners do as something that they prioritize. And then I want to talk a little bit about some things I just thought about on this trip that I'm at least ruminating on when it comes to my own business. I think might be interesting for other people as they are, in their own business as well and thinking about all the things. So let's get into it. I started a practice when I launched Dogco where I take a minimum of a week off every quarter. It took a bit of trial and error to figure out the best possible system for, what I truly needed to feel like I was staying well in my business. But with my pet care business, the first 3 years, maybe 4 of my business, I took 0 time off. Every weekend I was working every single day. I took trips, but I pretty much worked. And in the 4th year of my company, I just was like, this is so unsustainable. I am so burnt out. I just can't do this anymore. So the final year I owned my company, I did a month abroad and really spent some time thinking about just what do I need to stay well as a business owner, because I don't tend to have a lot of balance in my day-to-day life. And I've kind of always been like that. Like even before I was a business owner, I really like to fill my schedule. I like to do a lot of different things. I like to be active. I like to be busy. But to sustain that, I know I need a decent amount of time off. So I have come to see that for me, the best model is one where I'm doing kind of a combination of hard sprint, hard stop. And so I have set minimums as far as the minimum amount of hard stop time that I have to have on an annual basis in order to stay well. These don't have to be big trips. They don't have to be fancy trips. They just have to be time where I'm intentionally disconnecting. I will say I have a hard time doing that at home. If I'm home, I think because I'm so acclimated to being on while I'm here, it's hard for me to feel like I'm truly relaxing. So I do tend to travel for these trips. I know that that's not always accessible for everybody. It's not a have to have, just for me, it makes it easier. So I just modeled a new type of vacation this last month, and I think it's something I'm going to stick with moving forward. So I took 2 weeks in Canada. My husband and I took our dogs up, which was super, super fun. Definitely do your research if you are planning on crossing the border, just to make sure you have all the right paperwork, documentation. For us, it went really, really smoothly. And we stayed in the same place up in Canada for the whole trip. It's a little town up at the very far end of a peninsula in Ontario called Tobermory. We were there for 2 full weeks. And here's how we structured the vacation. And I share this because it kind of gets into some of the stuff on the second half of the episode. So I have determined for me the minimum viable amount of time that I need to stay well as a business owner is 1 week off per quarter, hard disconnect. I'm not, to the extent that my self-discipline allows it, I'm not in my inbox. I'm not actively chewing on things mentally. I'm just fully present, ideally doing a lot of hiking or kind of doing things to get myself out of my head and into my body, sleeping a lot, because that is something that naturally I do tend to sacrifice a little bit more than I would like to moving forward. So yeah, I do 1 week hard stop. That's what I need. What I wanted to experiment with this last trip was, what if I took 2 weeks, but the second week was like a work week without pressure? So if you own a company, and I imagine if you're listening to this podcast, you either currently own one or you're thinking about opening a pet care company. So if you have owned a business, then there are a lot of things you have to do on a daily basis that you don't really want to, that just have to get done, whether it's something in HR, it's something in data, it's something in the finances, it's having a hard conversation with a staff member. There are just so many things in the day-to-day of your business that require a lot of discipline to focus on that thing, to make it a priority, to make sure it gets done. And I find myself, and part of this is a growth area for me, I find myself never having as much time as I want to just like think on my business, to work on things that I find exciting and interesting, to just kind of give myself the room to like imagine and feel creative and to like just explore different interests and things that I just don't tend to make enough time to do during the week to week at home. Now, I need to get better at that. And that is something I kind of took away from this trip is like, I just need more open space than I naturally tend to give myself in order to explore all the things with my business that I think really would serve pet care companies really, really well and would set them up for success in all the changing business AI landscape that is to come. If you're ready to take your pet care business to the next level, then I want you in the room at the Dog Co. Business Summit, October 2nd through the 4th in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. We have brought together the very best speakers we could possibly find, and we are getting the best companies in the room to help give you the path to grow and scale your pet care business. Go to dogcosummit.com to learn more. But this trip, I just wanted to start with, what if I gave myself a completely no pressure week to just explore? And I loved it. I don't think schedule-wise I'm going to be able to swing that every quarter, but it is something I want to see if I can introduce a couple times a year. I have a strong suspicion that in hindsight, that second week that I took in Canada probably is going to be one of the most productive weeks that I had this year, like in the long view of this year. How do I put this? I worked on a lot of things that didn't have a clear outcome that I needed to ship. I just worked on things that I found interesting that I think are important. And what was really interesting is like some of the things that I ended up choosing to work on were things that I've kind of been putting off for a long time because they feel heavy. And I realized that I think part of the reason they feel heavy is I always feel really pressured on a timeline and things like that. So one of the things I built out was like a 2027 financial data dashboard where I could just map out different scenarios for my business that was fully customized to my business. So not, something like a tool I got from somebody else that I was trying to like bootstrap. I was like, I'm going to actually take the time to build my own financial model. I think I will use that document for a long time. I think that's going to be really, really helpful for me for planning. That for me, at the time, it did not feel productive. So going back into why I think this is important, it didn't feel productive. There wasn't a list I could check off. There wasn't, someone that I was sending this to who was going to be like, yay, good job. Thanks for getting that to me. It was purely because I, as the founder, think it's important. I am interested in it and I want to put time into exploring it. And I want to find more ways to incorporate that in my week-to-week life because I think the further I get into business, the more I see that time almost always has this like long tail return that is just incredible. Because it's this moment where you get to show up just fully present in your business and fully vulnerable and just follow your own interests. And so all that to say, I wanted to share a few things that I at least have been thinking about when it comes to my business and when it comes to what I'm building that came up this week that I took a lot of time around to just explore. As I've been organizing my thoughts and notes from this trip, because I did journal a lot, which is another practice I would really like to get back to. I used to journal all the time and then business got really busy. I mean, don't get me wrong. I just cleaned out my closet yesterday and I've probably filled 20 notebooks since Dogco started. This, I would say 2026 is the first year that I have not journaled consistently in probably 2 decades, but I've really gotten away from it this year and I want to get back to it because on this trip, it just reminded me like that's really cathartic for me. It helps me process a lot of like ideas and thoughts and emotion around business. For me, business is still a very emotional journey. I'm trying to figure out how much intention I want to put around changing that. Because on the one hand, it's like I feel very like mission driven and heart driven as an entrepreneur. On the other hand, I still struggle, as many people I work with do, to emotionally objectively separate from my business. So anyways, that actually came up a good bit for me on this trip is, in taking the space to kind of process some emotion around business. Is that something I would like to change? my kind of emotional drive around business. I do think that that serves me really well in many ways. I also think it can make it difficult to see my business objectively. It can make it difficult to build systems that don't centralize around me because I have a hard time like stepping back from things and handing them off. Very common business owner things, but I did spend a good bit of time thinking about that on this trip. The second thing I spent a lot of time thinking about was AI. AI, and I hear this from business owners in especially pet care, I think, because like AI just came on the scene and it was like, oh my gosh, this both doesn't apply to what I'm doing and also fully does. Like there's so many different things you can do with it. And I've noticed there is this tendency that I also have when it comes to AI or anything that feels like big and new. We or I start thinking about it like this huge project where it's like, I feel like I need a week to just AI, whatever that means. And on this trip, I had set for the second week. The first week, I truly did disconnect. I was like, okay, I'm off the grid. I am no longer here. The second week, I had set a target to do one AI implementation every day. And I'm in this community where they're doing these like micro AI trainings. It's like a community I'm investing to be a part of as a student. And with these trainings, they're all business focused, the AI implementations, and it is something you can do in like 30 minutes or less that creates some type of return to you. And that was my goal on this trip, was to just start chipping away a little bit because I knew realistically, even with having a week for deep work, I was like, I'm not going to use all of that for AI and I don't want to. Like there are a lot of other things with Doggo I want to focus on. So 30 minutes a day, one implementation. And everything I've done where I've chosen to kind of like get out of my own head and not make it a huge thing and instead just chip away a little bit every single day has panned out well. And I don't know why I'm always surprised. I don't know why I'm like, oh, this is going to be the one thing that's totally different. Turns out it isn't. Turns out that implementing AI into your business is just like any other big project that you take on that is going to take a long time to complete, doesn't have like a defined endpoint, and just is something you need to start. And so I thought about that a lot this trip. I left with several implementations that I think are going to be really, really, really helpful for Dogco, and left with a commitment to just continue doing that. Like I really want to keep this mindset coming off of this trip. I do not have to do it all at once. And I think it actually doesn't serve what I'm doing if I try and approach it that way. Because if you implement a little bit at a time, you give the room for feedback and data that's going to kind of affect the trajectory of future implementations. But when you try and knock it out in a single sprint, you don't get that feedback loop that makes whatever you would build next better. So I'm trying to keep that in mind, and I will be continuing to do a daily AI implementation moving forward, 30 minutes or less, just one high value implementation that I can do. One thing that I did on this trip, just if it's helpful to the listener, I went into my drive and created a folder called AI prompts, where if I come across something interesting and they give the prompt, I copy that, I put it in the folder, and I write a little description, or I ask AI to write it, a little description of like, what is this intended to do? And like, what is the outcome I could use this prompt to get? That way, if I don't get the chance to implement it, or if it's something where I'm like, gosh, this is awesome, I want to use this multiple times moving forward. I found a couple things last week where I think I'll use them as like either a weekly reflection or a daily practice. So having a place where you can go back and reference those prompts has already been really helpful. So that's your implementation for, oh, I had the hiccups. I am sorry. Okay. Last week in my deep work week, which I'm still processing and letting settle out. Next thing I spent a lot of time thinking about is the way that information is organized. So we just had the Dogco team retreat 3 weeks ago. It was the week before I left for my 2 weeks off. And I really love the timing of how these trips fell, because initially going into June, it was like, oh my gosh, this is so much packed into 1 month. But what it actually created was this room for me to get a lot of like feedback and do a lot of brainstorming with my team. And then I got to go straight into some downtime where I got to let it really kind of like sink in, and I got to think about things very deeply in a way in which I just normally don't get to because I'm running so quickly all the time. And one thing that was coming up often at our team retreat and also on this vacation was I think there's a drive that we tend to have in business that is centered around, like, I need to know something new rather than I either need more structure to implement, or I need more help to implement, or I need the information organized better. These are very, like, not super formed thoughts. And it's something that kind of feels like a really long thread if you start to pull it. Information organizing is really, really interesting to me. And I'm starting to see that top performers put a lot of time into this, like building databases and building libraries and building ways to reference knowledge and information. Like they build systems around what they know. And that's not something I've ever put a lot of time into, but I'm realizing that the systems around the information, I think that's the unlock. Like, I think that is how you transform your business and yourself to the next level is the information you collect and then how you organize it and then what you do with it. And I think I have always skipped that middle step of how you organize it, how you collect it and put it into frameworks or places that you can really draw from it in the future. And so I spent a lot of time thinking about how I organize information, working on a system within, I use the platform Notion with an N. I really like it for this, so if it's helpful, feel free to look into it. But how I organize information. And then I think the next natural step is really going to be looking at how do I organize information for clients within Dogco? Because at this point, there's a lot. Like we have 4 coaching partnerships this year. The success leaders do a lot too. I teach every single week, unless I'm traveling. Then we have guest speakers that we bring in who also teach. There is no lack of information. But I do think that with the volume of information it's going to become really important that there are clear pathways of what to do with that information. And I think all of that starts with how is it organized in the first place? So that's something I'm putting a lot more thought into. Dogco just grows, and I think my role shifts a little bit. Fourth thing I'm going to share, and then I will wrap up this very meandery podcast, but I hope it's bringing value to someone. These are things I think about a lot and took a lot of time to think about on our vacation. So the fourth thing that I spent a lot of time thinking about was how to create a strong baseline with anything new that I start, whether that's an employee relationship or even like friendships, like personal things, whether that's systems, whether it's new projects, new programs. We can always improve something once it is in a formed state, but the improvement will always be iterations off of a baseline of how the thing is to begin with. I'm trying to figure out how to make this cohesive. Maybe I don't need to. Maybe that is clear in and of itself as it is. Whatever the baseline is to whatever the thing is going to fundamentally shift your options and how far that thing can go once it has an established baseline. And so I personally, as a growth area, want to put a lot more time thinking about how can I start whatever the next new thing is with a stronger baseline, and by preparing more intentionally so that we start well. I just filmed an episode on client experience that kind of followed, I wasn't really intending for those two things to combine here, but there's a lot of overlap. Like the way that we start a relationship sets the tone of the depth that it will achieve, the trust that will be there. It's very hard to overcome a poor start. A good example I've seen in this is the difference between onboarding employees when you have a really well-prepared onboarding, you have SOPs, you have a training in place, you have like a bar of behavior versus times I've onboarded employees where it's like, oh, just come in, we'll figure it out. That tends to have a very different outcome. So that is something I put a lot of thought into. And then finally, I'll try and keep this one succinct because it's turning into a bit of a longer podcast than I anticipated. The final thing I put some time thinking about is if Dogco is still the vehicle that I want to be in as a founder. And it is, just to jump straight to it. And I want to explain why I think that is such an important question to ask yourself. And maybe I'll do a whole podcast on this at some point. But the times in my business, my previous businesses, that I enjoyed the least were seasons where I felt that I had no options. Which never is actually true. Just to be clear, I believe we always have options available to us, but sometimes we go through seasons where we stop acting like that is true and we start acting like I'm forced to be here. I don't have other options. I at least can have very disempowered frameworks around like just what I'm doing and what I have to do, quote unquote. I don't think we actually have to do anything. There are consequences to some things if we don't do them, but do we have to do them? No. So that is a question that once or twice a year, I really try and make myself sit with honestly, because I don't want to stay in a business out of obligation. I don't want to stay in a business out of expectation. I want to choose to be here because I know that if I do that, I genuinely will show up in much better ways for my clients, for myself, for my team, than if I have let myself kind of get into this framework or this place where it's like, I have to be here. And I took some time to sit with that. And I'm happy to say, after a very honest discussion with myself, Dogco is still the vehicle I want to be in. It's still the business I want to be in. I love what I do. It has shifted a lot and it's required me to grow at a pace this year that I think has been uncomfortable. And like, what a gift to be in a business that is growing me and is requiring me to learn more skills and more things to steward it well. So I'm hanging in there. Not even hanging in there, like that was a question. Well, no, actually, to do the honest wrestling with the question, that means that there has to be an openness to this not being the thing that you do. And again, this is something I do at least once a year, because I never want to stay in a business or stay on a life path that I'm not actually committed to. I don't think that would be fair to my clients. I definitely don't think that would be fair to me. I also don't think that would be honest. We do have options. That is why many people I work with, myself included, are entrepreneurs, so that we can build our life to be what we want it to be. So I did my once a year wrestling with that, and I'm excited for everything to come with Dogco, and it's going to be a really good second half to the year. So thanks for hanging in there. And I would encourage you, schedule some time off.